childhood of the man that would later be referred to as the Muswell Hill murderer and the Kindley killer, began normally enough. The marriage of his parents, Elizabeth Duthie Waite and Olaf Magnus Mucksham, was poor but seemed to have little effect on Dennis NILSEN. He spent much of his time with his grandfather, particularly enjoying long walks with him between seaside towns in the Scottish Highlands. NILSEN described his time with his grandfather positively. He believed these years to be the last time he felt true contentment. NILSEN's grandfather worked as a fisherman. NILSEN would later state that when he was away, life would be empty for me until he returned. NILSEN was unable to cope with the absence of one of the persons that he was truly close with. In 1951, when NILSEN was just 6 years old, his grandfather passed away while at sea. The body was brought home, and NILSEN asked to view it prior to burial. He gazed upon it as his mother explained that his grandfather was just sleeping. But the young Dennis NILSEN would never forget this incident. The emptiness that came each time his grandfather was on a fishing trip was now permanent. His contentment would never return. In the years that followed, NILSEN changed. He would spend days at the seaside, staring at the boats in the distance. He was unable to connect with his family or make friends. During one of his trips to the ocean, at about the age of 10, NILSEN suffered another traumatic experience. He was dragged out to sea by the currents and began to panic, until, while on the verge of drowning, close to death, a feeling overcame him. He felt his grandfather's presence. He felt like he would be saved, and he was, not by his grandfather, but another child. NILSEN suffered no physical damage, but this incident led to even more mental anguish. He felt that his grandfather had abandoned him. He should have been there to save NILSEN, but he wasn't. This incident birthed NILSEN's desire to make sure that nobody who loved him would ever leave him again. Years later, this impulse would begin to manifest itself in NILSEN's sex life. He fantasized about his partners being unconscious or even dead. While serving in the British Army, NILSEN developed a technique by which he could use a mirror to visually split his personality and make it appear as if he was engaging in sex with a dead body. Upon his return to civil life, NILSEN grew even more withdrawn. He sought casual sex but was unsatisfied, seeing it as soul-destroying and a vain search for inner peace. He truly wanted, but was unable to achieve a lasting relationship, somebody who would never leave him. This continued for years, until he entered into a long-term relationship for the first time at the age of 30. The pair moved into a home at 195 Melrose Avenue together. When negotiating the lease, NILSEN was insisting on having the exclusive use of the home's back garden. The relationship between Dennis NILSEN and his first serious partner, David Galashan, was strained at best. Neither person was sexually satisfied, and NILSEN began to verbally abuse Galashan. After about a year and a half, Galashan left NILSEN. NILSEN quickly returned to his search for a partner and entered into several relationships, but none lasted more than a few weeks. By 1978, he had convinced himself that he would be forever unable to find a long-term partner. Discouraged by this realization, he decided to take matters into his own hands. On December the 30th, 1978, 14-year-old Stephen Holmes entered the Cricklewood Arms pub in an attempt to purchase alcohol. At the same time, Dennis NILSEN entered the pub with the goal of finding a partner. According to his later recollections, he had decided that he would do so at all costs. NILSEN struck up a conversation with Holmes. He invited the child back to his home to drink, and the boy accepted. NILSEN and Holmes left the pub and returned to 195 Melrose. The two drank together throughout the night until they fell asleep. NILSEN awoke first the next morning. He later stated that he was afraid to wake him in case he left. He decided that Holmes would have to stay with me over the New Year whether he wanted to or not. NILSEN strangled Holmes with a tie before drowning him, masturbating over the body and storing his body under the Holmes floor. It stayed there for 8 months before he burnt it in a large bonfire that he held in the backyard at 195 Melrose that he had so specifically requested. Just a few months after the fire, NILSEN attempted to strike again. He tried to strangle and kill a student named Andrew Hoare, but failed. NILSEN was questioned about the attack, but no charges were pressed. This close call did not slow down NILSEN. 2 months later, now a year since his first murder, NILSEN succeeded again. He met another student, this time named Kenneth Ockenden, whom he again attempted to strangle. As Ockenden listened to music at 195 Melrose on a pair of headphones, NILSEN grabbed the cord and tightened it around his neck. When the deed was done, NILSEN took the headphones off of Ockeden's lifeless body and finished listening to the song that Ockeden had been strangled to. NILSEN then treated Ockeden's body even more strangely than he did his first victim. The day after the murder, he put the body into various positions and photographed it, before storing it in a plastic bag beneath the floorboards. Over the next several weeks, he would occasionally take the body back out of storage. He would unwrap the corpse and place it to sit next to him on the couch while he was watching TV. Over the next few years, this pattern would repeat itself about 10 times. There was 16-year-old Martin Duffy, who NILSEN strangled and drowned before he washed and bathed with the corpse. The incident left the body bloated, so he stored it under the floorboards within days of the murder. Many of his victims were never identified. In 1980 alone, NILSEN is estimated to have killed 5 individuals whose identities are not known. One victim seems to have caused some regret in NILSEN, as he seems to have attempted to resuscitate the body immediately after death, while another victim's body was made to lie in bed with NILSEN after their death. But his spree had begun to lead to a practical problem. The massive bodies stored in his house began to create a vile odour. He tried to keep the corpses clean to stop the smell, but it couldn't be abated. So near the end of 1980, Dennis NILSEN decided that something had to be done. He would conduct a mass burial by fire, similar to how he had disposed of the body of Holmes. NILSEN built a great bonfire behind his home to cover the smell of the 6 bodies that were to be disposed of, he topped the fire with a car tire. The fire gathered some attention, as 3 children from the neighbourhood came by to watch. He wasn't bothered by their presence, and even felt some pleasure at the fact that they were to witness the funeral pyre. When the fire had died down, he smashed all recognisable bones with the rake. In the year following his mass burning, NILSEN killed at least 4 more people. Like all of the others, they were invited back to NILSEN's home, murdered and toyed with before being stored. There seemed to be no suspicion against NILSEN, and there was no end in sight to his spree. Until, in the middle of 1981, NILSEN's landlord asked him to leave 195 Melrose so that it could be renovated. The day before he left, he held another bonfire, this time to dispose of the remainder of the corpses that were stored in his home. Due to the short notice given for NILSEN to relocate, his new home was less ideal for his nefarious purposes. He rented an attic apartment at 23 Cranley Gardens, which lacked access to any sort of private outdoor space. The apartment also had no accessible floorboards under which to store bodies. Likely due to the impracticality introduced by his new home, NILSEN took a short break from murdering after moving. For almost half a year, nobody died at the hands of Dennis NILSEN. But despite the risks, NILSEN could not hold back forever. In March of 1982, NILSEN met John Hewlett at a pub and invited him back to his apartment. They watched a film together before NILSEN attempted to murder Hewlett. Hewlett fought back and almost succeeded. NILSEN was bruised for weeks following the attack. But after 10 minutes of struggling, NILSEN succeeded in drowning Hewlett in his bathtub. NILSEN then began to dissect the corpse. He dismembered Hewlett, boiled his flesh, butchered his bones, and flushed the remains down the toilet. Next would be one of the few survivors of one of Dennis NILSEN's attacks, Carl Strotter. After falling asleep in NILSEN's bed, NILSEN dragged Strotter to the bathtub and began to attempt to drown him. Believing him to be dead, NILSEN then attempted to help Strotter regain consciousness. He succeeded, and when Strotter came to, NILSEN explained that he had accidentally strangled himself in his sleeping bag. Strotter remained in NILSEN's apartment over the next few days, falling in and out of consciousness. Eventually, NILSEN dropped Strotter off at a nearby train station, apparently having made no additional attempts to murder him. NILSEN's next 2 targets were not so lucky. First was Graham Allen. NILSEN kept Allen's body in his bathtub for 3 days after killing him, before dissecting him on the kitchen floor. Then came NILSEN's final victim, Stephen Sinclair. While spending time together at NILSEN's apartment, NILSEN approached Sinclair, knelt before him and spoke. "Oh, Stephen, here I go again." He then strangled Sinclair and bathed his body. NILSEN's post-murder ritual for Sinclair was even more elaborate than normal. After the bath, he covered the corpse from head to toe in talcum powder and carried it to his bed. He then positioned a trio of mirrors around the bed, allowing him to view the body from all angles before getting into bed next to it. He kissed him on the forehead and began whispering, "Good night, Stephen." And then he slept, spending the entire night next to the corpse. After each killing at Cranley Gardens, NILSEN had destroyed the body to whatever extent possible before disposing of the remains by flushing them down the toilet. But this approach proved to be less successful than his strategy at 195 Melrose. Plumbing issues began to emerge at the apartment building. On February the 4th, 1983, NILSEN himself wrote a letter to his landlord asking for them to clear the drains. Less than a week later, when a plumber arrived on the scene to examine the blockage, they found numerous bones and pieces of flesh. When the plumber mentioned this to NILSEN, he responded by saying that it looks to me like someone had been flushing down their Kentucky Fried Chicken. But when the plumber returned the next day, the drain had been cleared. This aroused suspicion, so they began to search deeper. In a pipe that led from NILSEN's apartment, they discovered bones and scraps of flesh that would identifiably be human. When examined by a pathologist, it was discovered that one piece of flesh showed signs of damage, as if a strangulation had occurred. Shortly after, the police were called. Though he initially denied having anything to do with the body parts, NILSEN did not put up much of a fight. Upon being asked where the body was, NILSEN immediately answered that the remains that had not yet been disposed of were in a plastic bag in his closet. After he was arrested and was being taken to the police station, he was asked if the remains belonged to one or two people. 15 or 16, he calmly replied. Over the next few days, NILSEN confessed to every single murder that he could recall. A search of the backyard at 195 Melrose turned up over 1,000 blackened bone fragments, while a search at 23 Cranley Gardens led to the discovery of several larger dismembered body parts throughout the apartment. When asked to explain his reason for the killings, NILSEN responded by saying, "I'm hoping you will tell me all that." He claims that each murder was a split-second decision and that none were planned in advance. He described their bodies as beautiful and explained how he applied makeup to their corpses to keep them resembling their living selves. He explained that his rituals were a symbolic gesture of respect and a way to say goodbye to his victims. After a long trial, NILSEN was sentenced to life imprisonment with no chance for appeal. Though he fought the assertion during the trial, he admitted that he had killed with premeditation after he was sentenced. NILSEN said that he took joy from the social seduction, the getting their friend back, and decision to kill, the body and its disposal. While in prison, he wrote a currently unpublished autobiography titled The History of a Drowning Boy, the title of which is a reference to the childhood incident that he believes shaped his conception of love, life, and death. He confessed that he killed because he felt incomplete, inadequate, and out of control. On May the 12th, 2018, he died of complications of a blood clot, having never shown any signs of regret for the brutal killings he performed.